Welcome everyone to our second Pride Stoking Curiosity. And thank you to Katie Fortunato, who has brought Rick Landman as our guest today. If you don't know Katie, can you raise your hand or wave? So Katie makes the office run in New York City. There she is. Thank you. And our guest, Rick Landman. We've just done 2 new business pitches in the New York office, and we couldn't have done them without you, Katie. So thank you for that. And thank you for bringing our guest today, Rick Landman. Rick and Katie are going to talk about their work together and especially Rick's work with the ARC Immigration Clinic at the Congregation Bet Simchat Torah, or CBST, if you can't pronounce it like I can't. MullenLowe has made a donation of $500, and Katie Tamara will pop in where you can donate to his organization. And later in his talk, he's going to chat about other ways you can volunteer if you're interested. But Rick is part of the world's largest LGBTQ synagogue. And it's 50 years old, I believe, Rick told us. And he's been there all 50 years. And I think this weekend was his 49th Pride March. So he has a lot of stories to tell us about that. And I'd like to hand it over to Katie Fortunato so that she can start the chat with Rick. And thank you both for joining.
Rick, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everybody out there in TV land with us tonight. So Rick is a friend of mine. I've known him since I joined CBST. And that would be almost 10 years ago, something like that at this point. Rick is a gay son of 2 Jewish German refugees who started coming out at the age of 12 in 1965, and has been active in many LGBT organizations over the years. So academically, he has 3 master's degrees and a Juris Doctorate, and could finally become an openly gay teacher and lawyer by the 1980s. He's now retired from NYU and New York Law School.
Okay, well, I want to thank you all for this opportunity. I just realized this week, it's been 50 years since I graduated from college, and I wanted to be a teacher. And I realized in 1973, openly gay people were mentally ill, according to the American Psychiatric Association's DSM. So I knew there would be a problem with being a teacher, but in 73, they removed, I was no longer mentally ill. So I went and got my first master's in education, and I did my student teaching. I actually found I have my permanent certificate to be a social studies history teacher. And I got a job offer. And then when I went to the job offer, the funding source person called me in and said, Richard, I hear you're a homosexual. And I'm saying, hey, I started the Gay Liberation Front in this college that, at UB in 1970. It's not like a secret. He says, well, I said, no, I'm not mentally ill. That was last year. He said, well, I don't care. If a parent came and said they don't want their child to be taught by a homosexual, what am I supposed to do? So I advise you take the job, we cut the funding. So that's why I have so many master's degrees. I went and got my second master's was in engineering. But I was going to the Pride Parade since I went that June of 70 to the first one. And I actually thanked my mother yesterday for letting me go at 18 and my mother said, Ricky, there was nothing we could do to stop you. And also I said, when I came back the first March, my mother said, did you meet someone nice? I said, Mom, there were nothing but a bunch of old men. They were in their 20s and 30s. So now I am 71 years old and working against ageism. But anyway, in 1974, when I was going through this problem with wanting to be a teacher, they started the Gay Teachers Association, and I found this button. This is an actual button from 1974. Mark Rubin, who started the organization, also dead by now, he gave me the pin. So what I'm going to do today with everybody here, I'm going to finally become that teacher that I wanted to be back in the 1970s. And I'm going to try to stroke your curiosity on looking at this whole sort of historical picture, which is basically my life. Now, I know in some states it's controversial, and you're not allowed to talk about these things, but I am going to be talking about the rise of Nazism in Germany and let you sort of see if any of these things sound familiar to you. But I'm going to be doing it by just telling you some family stories. As Katie said, both of my parents were born in Germany, and they both got to America in 1939 as refugees. This is before we had any asylum laws, and the majority of my family, 17 on my dad's side, all were enslaved and murdered right before I was born. America in 1924 decided we have too many Irish, Italian Catholics and too many Jews. We want to go back to the 1980 census when America was predominantly pale, male, and Protestant. And therefore, they made these quotas and they made these immigration laws and affidavits, which basically prevented my family from coming here. Of the 5 children of my great-grandparents, only my grandpa and then his wife and 3 kids survived and were able to come to America. So I'm going to be basically going and taking us back in time right now to the 1890s. In America, that was the Supreme Court's Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, where racism and discrimination and segregation were the law of the land, and lynchings and horrible treatment of many, many minorities was the way it was to be. And not only in the South. I'm born in New York City before Brown versus Board of Education on a Jewish block. No one in my school had darker skin than I had, and the predominant amount of people in my school were Irish and Italian Catholics and Jews. And when you bought your house in my mother and father's neighborhood, my mom still lives there, she's 96, everyone on that street was Jewish. So in Germany, they were looking at amazement at such a wonderful system that America had. There has always been anti-Jewish feelings in Germany, and the people were amazed at how America was getting away with this. So they decided, hey, let's do the same thing. So in the 1890s is when a lot of the term anti-Semitism and this whole racial constructs that there were going to be Aryans and Untermenschen, and then under the Untermenschen were Jews. So where in America, we created these weird binary concepts of white versus coloreds, Germany had their Aryans versus their Untermenschen. And they even had Jesus as an Aryan. Jesus was not Jewish. Jesus has a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan, according to the right wing of Germany during that time period. Now, this is the time period of my grandparents. And my grandparents at first lived in little rural towns, and there were less than 1% of Germany was ever Jewish at its height. So there were very few Jews living in these little rural, mildly educated places, which was the stronghold of the Nazi leadership. And as the years were going, even though in 1871, Jews in Germany got their full citizenship and full rights, which was very unique in Europe. The area around Poland and Ukraine and Russia, Jews had no rights, they were no citizenship. But in Germany in 1871, Jews got their full rights. My grandpa fought in World War I with his brother for the Kaiser. After World War I, though, this right wing in Germany really started getting stronger and picking on the Jews and creating propaganda, stereotypes and everything, that even though it was legal to be Jewish and you were a citizen, you were scared and nervous. So Jews start migrating out of the little towns and going into the bigger cities where you would have a bigger synagogue, you'd have a bigger community, and you would feel safer. So my grandpa left from Uffenheim to go to Nuremberg. My grandmother left from Friedberg to go to Nuremberg. Nuremberg wasn't a good place to go to if you were Jewish. By the time the 20s were coming to an end, and my mom was born in Nuremberg in 27, you had a lot of fights between the communists and the Nazis and everything. And my grandpa, I don't know if you can tell from this, I'm only 5 feet tall. I take after my grandpa. On my father's side, my great grandpa had blue eyes. My father and brother have blue eyes, but he was 6 feet tall. I have brown eyes, and I take after my mother's side. But my grandpa kicked the head Nazi in Nuremberg, who ran the Stürmer newspaper in the Tuches, and ran away during one of the street fights. So he was put on the list to be arrested on the opening day of Dachau. So Germany, the people in Germany, even the Jews, very similar to, in a way, in America, where you have log cabin Republicans, you had different Jewish sects that didn't like each other. So you actually had, like in Germany, you had Jews for Hitler, and Neumann and Schips, and this is an actual pamphlet from Neumann, started groups for Jews for Hitler, in that they felt, hey, we're more part of the German community. We're affluent. We like that the trains will run on time. My family on my mother's side, they lived in Germany for 400 years. So there were a lot of Germans who did not like the Eastern European Jews that were moving into German society. So these Jews wanted to ostracize, and it was the Nazi propaganda stereotypes were not of the urbane, educated Jew. It was of the Hasidic, the Orthodox, the Central European Jews. So the same sort of conflicts at first of Jews fighting Jews is in a way similar to in New York, when we were fighting, well, first in New York City, we were fighting for the gay rights bill. We didn't really understand back in the 60s and 70s, sexual orientation, gender identity, sex. And in New York State, I know this goes around the country, when they first passed the gay rights bill and the statewide bills, these things excluded trans community, because politically they said it was more advantageous to get the bill passed now and eventually we'll expand it. So I remember going to Albany several years lobbying to finally have the T included in the New York State laws. But the same thing was happening back in Germany. And then this guy came up with a big lie. Now, not that he won an election, that's American. Hitler said the Germans won World War I in the field, and that it was the Jews and the politicians at home that signed the Treaty of Versailles that stabbed them in the back. But that actually, we're going to make Germany great again. The German army won the war. And then along with Himmler and all of the other propaganda, all of these lies kept on happening, where Der Stürmer every day, if at most there were 500,000 Jews, if one was a rapist or a thief or a murderer, every day on the front page of the Stürmer would be Jew murders, Jew rapes, Jew kills, until eventually, when most of the Jews left all of those rural areas, the rural Germans never even saw or knew or spoke to a Jew, but they were the experts because they read Der Stürmer, they read the propaganda, and they knew what was going on, even though in reality, they knew nothing. So Hitler, again, did not have he did have a coup in Munich in the 20s, similar to, say, January 6th, but it was, he lost and he was imprisoned for 6 months. That's when he wrote with Rudolf Hess, the Mein Kampf book. It wasn't such a typical prison because you got your own secretary typing there with you. But as Hitler was able to manipulate the electoral system that they had in Germany, similar to like we have an electoral college, which isn't really the popular vote, Hitler was able to become the chancellor in 1933. And that's when things really started getting worse for both sides of my family. My father, my mother's side left on March 23rd, 1933, as the SA was coming down the street Grandpa knew he was tipped off that he was on the list to be arrested. He went out the back door, went to the railroad station, took the first train out, which happened to go to France. And then my mother, at the age of 6, and my grandmother went to Strasbourg and met my grandfather. So they were safe in the early Nazi years. My father's side had no relatives in America, had no money, thought this was a passing phase. And they had no place to go. So they stayed in Germany. Comes 35, overnight, just like yesterday was the year anniversary of women losing the right to choose after 50 years, the Jews who fought for hundreds of years to be considered citizenship in one night, September 15th of 1935, the Nuremberg laws, they lost all their citizenships. And if you were married to an Aryan, you were no longer married to an Aryan. Jews could not marry Aryans. My father used to tell me that the only time he saw his father cry was on March 5th, up until Dachau, was on March 15th when he lost his citizenship. And then what Americans don't know, Himmler started the next year the Committee to Combat Homosexuality and Abortion. The same sort of themes of the right wing seem to be prevalent in both countries. So by 36, 37, things start getting much worse for my father's side. The businesses stop. I have newspaper clippings of when my grandfather left Uffenheim, he left his sister there and she was running the business. So those big boycott signs that say boycott this store, it's owned by a Jewess. She came to my bar mitzvah. That was Tante Betta and Tante Elsa were running that store. So it was becoming tougher and tougher to make a living, to even survive in Germany as a Jew. And then came November, I think it was 7th or 8th in Paris, a young 17-year-old Jewish boy bought a gun and shot and killed Ernst von Rath. And that's what then was the excuse that was used for Kristallnacht, when my 18-year-old father was arrested by the Gestapo at 5 a.m. from his bedroom. And then his father was later arrested that day, and then they went to Dachau. That was the second time my father said that he saw his father cry. Cutting things shorter, grandfather is able to get out under the quota system because allegedly, not his 4 brothers and sisters or parents, he was born in Russia. The year he was born, his birth certificate was in Russia and it was under Russian control. They were on near the river between the Austro-Hungarian Empire, now inside Ukraine, and Russia. So he gets to America. Then my father, a nice lawyer in London, does the paperwork, similar to what we do at ARC at CBST, got my 18-year-old dad to be an unaccompanied teenager living on the streets of London, not speaking English, and after September 1st being an enemy alien living in London, but takes care of him and then eventually gets him to America. Daddy then, when Pearl Harbor happens, joins the army, goes, still not a citizen, kept on saying, when am I becoming a citizen? Yes. And they said your paperwork got shot by a torpedo and the ship went down. So you keep on fighting. When your citizenship papers come, we'll let you know. Somewhere in Tripoli, he became an American citizen, went through Sicily, Italy, France, and then his group is there the day they liberate Dachau. And Colonel Porter says to him, we're going to be liberating Augsburg, where my father is from. Would you like to go with another person in a Jeep and just see if your family's alive? So he goes the day before liberation, and as he's driving in, people are opening windows and waving white flags. And my father yells back in fluent Augsburger accent German, "Ach, no, not today, tomorrow. I'm only here visiting today." So of course, that's when he learned none of his family survived. But my father stayed after the war ended for a few months to help denazify Augsburg, because he knew who were the typical Germans and who were the ardent Nazis. And he taught me 3 things that I want to convey to you. First thing is, you have to let the people out from under the rock, because you know they're there for hundreds of years. But unless they finally come out in the open, You never know who you're fighting against. The second thing is even harder. And as a kid, when we would talk about these things, I really didn't have so much of a grasp. Starting around 1985, we started talking about this. He said, you have to give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves. But it's very scary living during that time when they have all the rope. So during that time, even in today's world, first you have to know who your enemy is, and then you have to give them enough to show what the hell they're going to do. And hopefully, unlike in World War II, where 50 million people had to die, hopefully we can resolve this in a nonviolent type of way. And then the third thing he said was, some of these people, you can talk yourself to the talking to the wall, forget about it. They're never going to change. I'm there with an American army uniform and a rifle, and they still thought Hitler was alive and was going to win the war. So some people believe this supremacist propaganda and the hate propaganda and whatever the scientific things that they think they know, that you can't talk to them after a while. He would say, you know what you do? You speak with the people who said, I am sorry we killed your family. That's a starting point that you could start with. You have to find people that have given up on the hatred, who realize that the big lies were big lies, to realize that this whole life that they were living through is based on things that were very destructive. So that's the piece of German history, the end of the Weimar Republic and democracy, that we'll put aside a little bit. And now we're going to come to America. And World War II is over. My daddy meets my mommy, and they become married, and they have my older brother first, and then they have me. And I grew up in a very sheltered and secure little environment. Everyone on my block was Jewish. Ours was the only family where my father had an accent that was German, and not my grandparents having a Yiddish type of Jewish accent. And my father, the lederhosen that he wore when he went to Dachau, when you left, they put it in a brown paper. When you got there, they put it in a brown paper bag and wrote your number on it. And if you were released, they gave you back your clothes. So my father would leave Dachau to go back to Augsburg wearing the same lederhosen that he wore in the other direction. And when he packed to go to London and then to New York, he took the lederhosen with him. So if you can picture this, 1950s, a whole Jewish block. My father, when he would do gardening in the backyard or in the whatever, he would put on his lederhosen because he didn't want to get his other clothes dirty. That's what he would wear. Those lederhosen and his army uniform that he wore the day before liberation is now in the museum, the Jewish Museum of Augsburg. And those lederhosen went to Dachau. They were on a whole exhibit. My father used to say, I'm here stuck in Queens and my lederhosen's going all over the world. So I grew up, I went to Hebrew school. It was built at the corner. It was the Jewish block. So they left the land to build a synagogue, which is now closed. I was valedictorian at Hebrew school and Hebrew high school. I had a Torah that my mother's father brought to America that on June 26th, today, I was supposed to donate to the Burroughs Jewish Center on my bar mitzvah. Today is the exact date of my bar mitzvah. The universe was letting me know 4 years ahead of Stonewall to not book too much on the last weekend of June because you're going to be doing a lot of walking. So in Hebrew school class, at the age of 12 and 65, we're learning how boys and girls get married. Taller boy, shorter girl, taller boy, puts around the room, comes to me and says, there's no girl shorter than you. You just look at what the other people do. When you get married, you do the same thing. And I'm saying, but I don't want to marry a girl. So I raise my hand in front of the whole class and say, is there something if two boys want to get married? I am 12 years old, 1965. He yells at me so in the hallway, never, never, never will two boys ever get married. That I said, well, then they're not getting the Torah. So I came home and we talked to my parents. And at that time, I didn't tell them I was gay yet. Told my summer camp counselor that summer, but not my parents yet. They knew though. I said, what happens if I move to another synagogue? I want to take it with me. So we wrote a contract. And later on, when 1973 comes, which is 50 years ago, the reason I'm the longest running member at CBST is because my mother and I had discussions on what are we going to do with the Torah by 73. And I said, one day there'll be a gay synagogue. I want to bring it there. So when I came home for spring break in 73, my mother said, you know, Ricky, I said you were Meshiga that there'd be a gay synagogue. They started a gay synagogue here. Go. So I drove, at that time I had a car. I drove into the city and I was at the Church of the Holy Apostles when we started Congregation Bet Simchas Torah. So I'm one of the few people alive that can say I was actually in those services in the early months. That Torah later on I sent back to Munich, and it's now in Congregation Beth Shalom in Munich. But I've been active in that synagogue all along, and we started Gay and Lesbian Children of Holocaust Survivors. And again, in 2017, there were so many young men coming from Ukraine and the former Soviet Union and seeking asylum that we started an asylum clinic. And again, I forgot to tell you, I couldn't be an attorney, even with, I had 3 masters. I couldn't go to law school until after 1980 in New York State. I was a criminal promoting criminality because as way back as 71, when I went to the March on Albany for gay rights, we were trying to get them to repeal the cross-dressing laws and the sodomy laws. They were still on the books, but in New York State in 1980, the Court of Appeals, our highest court, made them unenforceable. So the morals turpitude clause of the Bar Association no longer prevented me from going to law school. So in the 1980s, I went to law school. I graduated cum laude. I then worked at NYU for 20 years, including being a professor. When I retired, I went to New York Law School and I taught there. But then when I retired, I started just doing a lot of volunteer work for the LGBT community. I was lead counsel for our walking clinic at the center on Tuesdays. I did with CBST our asylum clinic, filling out the 589 forms. Now, because of Zoom, we have expanded so much because we can get lawyers and people from all out of the country just to help us out, that I think in 2023, we have over 30 forms that were filled and the people had their credible fear hearing and have received their asylum status. So for one little synagogue, we're doing pretty good. So I also helped draft the first domestic partnership law in New York City. I volunteered in housing court every Monday. So that degree that I got that I never used for a career, I was able to use it for teaching and I was able to use it for volunteer work. So I think that's an important part too. So do you have any other specifics while I take a look and see what if I'm missing out from here?
Nobody has any questions just now. I did have one question, and speaking on today's problems, especially as the LGBT community faces in a number of states and probably even more countries, how do we give them the rope?
No, they take the rope. It's just we have to help them to hang themselves. So that's what the problem is that, and again, history, people have been hating the LGBT community, what we used to call gypsies and now Roma-centric. Throughout history, there's always been certain groups of people or skin shades that historically have been hated. So what I personally think is that we all have to just form coalitions. And I've been fag bashed 4 times.
Oh, that's for
And Rabbi Kleinbaum says this all the time too. The more they hate you, the more they hurt you, the more you have to be yourself. So, the more they were trying to repress me from being gay, the gayer I would be becoming. So that was also one of the strongest things in the 60s, which I understand the complications today in the trans community. But coming out was a very difficult personal and career move, but it was a very strong political move. Because when the right wing can say that they don't know any LGBT people, And they can make up stories because they have no idea when their children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews or neighbors or coworkers come up to them and say, hey, what you said was very hurtful. I happen to be a member of the LGBT community. Cut that out. Stop it. That was one of the things that really was able to help the Gay Liberation Front and all of the different gay organizations. I was a member or executive committee member or founder and of so many of those things. The biggest thing in the 70s was coming out. In the trans community, things are a little bit more complicated because I have friends who are now cisgender and don't want to not the gender that they were assigned at birth, and they don't want anyone else to know. So I can't say, well, you have to come out politically, because personally, that's something they don't want to do. So that's why I think the LGB part has to really take a bigger step and showing more support, especially to our T friends who people don't know are T. It's a different phenomenon. And then the other thing that I can't understand, well, again, it's my responsibility as an old person. When people like DeSantis and all say that, oh, if we can only remove from media and from newspapers and from radio to TV and movies, gay, you can't say it, it's going to disappear. There'll be no more LGBT people in the next generation. Hello, every baby boomer who was born in the 50s, the only LGBT person who I knew was Uncle Milty from the Milton Berle show on television. I did not have gay friends. I did not see gay movies. I did not see gay porn on Pornhub. They didn't have any of those things. But we all came out being gay. And although you can sort of see this, there in the back of my book, I have a picture of me at the age of 7. And I'm coming out of a swimming pool in the German Jewish side of the Catskills. And my grandma was standing there with a brownie, and she said, come on, Ricky, we'll take a picture. And I get out, and I put my foot up, and, that's me. And it says, I love grandma in my bathing suit. So I knew I was gay since I was like 7 years old, and no one had to I didn't see a movie or drink some water and all of a sudden become gay. So let's see, I'm coming close to the 40 minutes. So the things that I want to really talk about again is that besides the big lie theory is going extremely well in this country right now, is that to learn the art of propaganda, one of the things you do is you pick the fringe of the fringe of the fringe. So for example, on Facebook today, my friends have been sending me pictures of if there were 5 women whose breasts were being shown yesterday. And I went through both marches. I was at Reclaim Pride and I was at Heritage of Pride. The vast, vast, vast majority of the people were not the pictures that you're going to see on Fox News or in those newspapers. They will just pick on the exceptional exception to scare the other people living in the rural areas who have never seen a pride parade. The boring things don't make good media, so they don't see that. But that's part of free the nipple. Okay. For me, I personally don't care, and I personally also understand satire. I saw on Facebook someone was saying at the drag march, I think on Saturday, we're coming for your children. So I was saying that in sarcasm, but that is what's being filtered. So we have to teach, especially I think the younger generation can see through this faster. Like my generation, they can't even see when the Photoshop doesn't look real. So they think it's real. So I hope that the issue that I'm trying to convey to the next generation is proportionality. In my generation, when I was growing up, 95% of the people, the parents, that generation did not believe in gay marriage, did not believe in gay rights, believed that it's okay for fag bashing to go on. Then my generation is Bernie versus Donald Trump. And I am born in Queens in the hospital right near Donald Trump only a few years later. But I'm more like Bernie. were both Jewish children of Holocaust survivors from New York City. But there were too many Trump people to overdo the Bernies, the hippies, whatever. But in each successive generation, I am hoping that the proportions are changing so that you will always have people like the Pharaoh and people like Moses, community activists. The question is, after all these thousands of years, are we finally reaching the tipping scale where the majority of the people are going to say, love thy neighbor, welcome the stranger, be yourself. Let's have a country with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And happiness starts with you being who you are inside. And if more and more children and the next generation are brought up believing that, then these other people will come to the fourth thing that my father never told me. But eventually when you win, you want to put the nail in the coffin and say, that's it already. Those people who hate Jews and hate gay people and hate people with darker skin and hate foreigners and hate this and hate that, enough already. Even though you win the Electoral College once in a while, you are not what the majority of this country stands for. And that's why I came here today to give you this little lecture on German Jewish history and let you use your own minds to sort of figure out what analogies I was giving for today. And to sort of end this, my mommy still lives in the congressional district that George Santos won the election. That's where I'm from. So I tried to explain to my mother they voted for a gay, Jewish, relative of Holocaust survivors. And she goes, no, that's you. I said, no. And actually, I live right next to the World Trade Center and was there on 9/11. So all of those stories that he made out to run with, he's actually identity thefting me. So I don't know how to end this except for if you out there have any questions, I still have 20 minutes or so to answer. If not, I'll just do pure storytelling about different stories in my life.
We do actually have one question from the chat.
Good.
From Courtney Calvert. New laws in Florida and Tennessee in particular are so alarming. As a lawyer, do you have any advice on how best to support combating those laws if you don't live there? What organizations are most effective in your opinion?
Well, I mean, there are national organizations, Lambda Legal, which Bill Tom started. I knew him. National Gay and Lesbian, is it? Do they finally put the T in their thing too?
I don't know.
Task
Actually, that's a good
force.
question.
So there are all those national organizations, but you know the bigger thing is we have to change the Supreme Court. If Hillary would have won, we wouldn't have had any of these issues to begin with. But it's the court that, just like in Germany, rights can be reversed, in America, rights can be reversed. And the trail of legal from Griswold for contraceptives to Roe v. Wade for abortion, and then came this privacy, this penumbra of privacy from different parts of the Declaration of Independence and everything that developed Roe v. Wade, that Texas, Lawrence versus Texas came from. If you remember Bowers versus Hardwick in 1986, Georgia said it was legal to arrest people for committing sodomy who were adults in the privacy of their own homes. So the real laws in this country, just as Trump and Roy Cohen and these people knew, you could fight the law by changing the judges and getting them then to change the law. We got to go back to having stare decisis and having laws that are based on morals and that you sort of know what it's going to be, not who appointed the Supreme Court justice and who gave them a vacation and how are they going to vote. So I think the biggest national thing that we could do is have a Supreme Court that goes back to the concept of granting privacy rights to all citizens and to be able to know what the laws are going to be, not just will Trump's people be able to get 5 votes. So, and then locally, I mean, even if you're not in Tennessee, whatever, I am sure that there is, if you want to send money, you can always send money to LGBT groups in those areas. But there are national groups that even the ACLU, that are sending lawyers to help change the laws in those places. But our biggest threat is, and it's funny, when I taught my law classes, actually when I was a law student, I raised my hand once and I said that, all of this is politics. And my teacher would say, no, the Supreme Court doesn't work like that. But what we have to do is focus in on demanding the type of things like the Equality Act. Believe it or not, in 1971, when I went to Albany, I met a woman named Bella Abzug. And she said, let's amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include, and again, at that time, was just the word sexual orientation. We didn't even know what the word gender identity was. I wore red nail polish because I wanted people to know I was gay so that I could finally find a boyfriend, maybe. It had nothing to do with gender at that time. But she drafted the first, quote, gay rights bill in 74 that was introduced into the House. That has now become the Equality Act that includes sexual orientation and gender identity. It's still not been passed. So if you want to help Tennessee and Florida and Texas, if we would have a gay rights bill that it covers us for employment, public accommodations, housing, this is like one of the first steps that we would need nationally to help these other states. So, anything else?
Do we have any other questions for anybody out there?
You know what, I just would ask that you talk a little bit more about the asylum work that you do.
Oh, okay.
The way that, because that's the organization that's attached to CBST,
All right.
your synagogue. And if you could talk about the asylum work that you do and.
Okay, so as I said,
in
the first thing that started was a group called RUSA, R-U-S-A. And what this was, again, it's not Jewish. It was Russian, former people from the Soviet Union who spoke Russian. And at that time, Ukrainians were speaking Russian because I wouldn't make two sets of forms. So when they came for an intake form, we handed it in Russian. We had to change that. So at first it was it was mostly men who were able to come to the United States. And at first it was social. So through CBST, we became the umbrella that RUSA became to use our space and to get funded and stuff. Then a man named Sebastian McGuire, who I think was Danny Drum's assistant, he started a group called SAFE. Can't remember exactly what it stands for, but once a month, we met in person and we would help asylum seekers to get the 589 form and fill it out and to try to get an attorney. But we did it in person. So we had to have physical space to have a one-on-one that was quiet. So we only had maybe 2 or 3 rooms that we like this, that you could sit down and have an interpreter and a lawyer and the friends work on it. But when COVID came, we had to stop all in-person work. And then a good thing from Zoom, when we learned what a breakout room was, that you can have an asylum seeker in New Jersey, a lawyer in Massachusetts, an interpreter in Florida, working together to help the asylum seeker fill out the forms. So we do it normally on a Wednesday night and a Thursday night. Right now we're having staffing problems, so we're closed on Thursday nights. But anyone who wants to, give a donation, be my guest. But if you want to get involved, you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't even have to be an interpreter, because we also need a computer type of person. When they kept on talking about Heroku, do you even know it's an app?
No.
I never heard of it either. I don't even know from Google Docs when they tell me, oh, go to Google Docs and pull down this and so we do have now a 4th person in our group who is just a lay person who knows how to use computers, and the internet. So we then will put those 4 people together, and every 1 day a week, we work with them to fill out their forms. We then, when the forms are filled out, we try to get an attorney who will accompany them. And again, sometimes we can, because a lot of times the attorneys can't do that much pro bono work. But if the forms are already all filled out and the narrative is filled out and everything is all put together, they're willing to meet with the person, go through it all once, and then go with them to their hearing. If not, we also have through an accompaniment program where no one has to be an attorney. It does help if you speak the language, because you go and you just hold their hand. So I have done that with my friend who speaks Spanish, and the 3 of us will go and sit, and just this way, when they're scared because they don't speak English and you're in a court situation and you're before a judge and you don't have your own attorney, it's just nice to have an accompaniment. But that's only for people who are in the New York, New Jersey, Long Island area. But we have the accompaniment program. And then we actually had a bail fund for when people were being detained and had to post bail. We had a revolving fund where we could give money to pay for the bail, and then when the person appears, we get that money back. We've also have just minor support type of things. If people need clothing, we don't have a place for them to stay. But we've been working with all of the other asylum groups to try to help out. As I said, my synagogue now, I remember when it was like 50, but we now have like over 1,200 members, I think, in our synagogue. So, and not everybody is Jewish. It's also a strange thing, because you have a lot of couples where one member of the couple is Jewish and the spouse may not be. So that's basically what CVST is doing with ARC. And as I said, I think we've now had contact with over 1,000 people. Again, we don't handle everybody. We direct people to other places. We basically focus more on the LGBT people. And that has been going on even since 2017, when there was the New Sanctuary Coalition. They would send us, the LGBT people, to work with, because we had a softer touch to be able to understand what people were feeling. Another question?
Thank you.
No additional questions at this time from out there. Does anybody else have anything we'd like to ask? You can feel free to unmute or put it in the chat as you prefer.
If not, I'll give you a story. It's very fitting for yesterday. I'll tell you about the first Pride March in New York City. So I started the Gay Liberation Front because a woman named Madeline Davis in Buffalo, who started Radical Lesbians. I was at my neighbor's apartment and they were having a book reading. And these were my neighbors, exactly. So we were actually, the guy I fell in love with married one of those women, putting that aside. I was always hanging out there and I read the book, whichever the book was that they were talking about. So I said, can I stay? And Madeline goes, no, all men out of here. If you want a group, go start your own. So I said, okay. So I went to the Student Association. And at that time, we had fights for Vietnam, so I knew a lot of the people in the Student Association. So I filled out a form, I raised my hand, and I said, I would like to start a new group. At that time, I called it Gay Men's Liberation Front. I was copying what was happening in Manhattan, but if the women didn't want me, then I didn't want any women. Don't forget, I'm 17 years old. So I fill out, I make a sign, I get a table at the student union next to the candy store guy. So once I felt protected because he knew I bought a lot of candy, because there were nasty people who would throw things at me and make fun of me. But then a woman walked by named Wendy, I don't remember her last name. And she came up to me and she said, I'm afraid of the radical lesbians. Can I join your group? So I said, to tell you the truth, I don't have any members yet, but I need a president. I'll be president. I need a vice president, secretary, and a treasurer. You want to be one of those, and you help me change the sign. So we changed and made it Gay Liberation Front, same as in New York. She became either, I think, the secretary or the treasurer, because I remember Benny Wallman was my vice president. And I ended up finding enough people, and I had a dance so that people would come to the dance, and we formed the group. They gave me $800. They gave me a room in the student union and a bookcase. So I made the bookcase into our, we didn't call it LGBT at the time, it was gay and lesbian, our gay and lesbian library. And I took about $400 from the 800. And when I came to New York City, to Manhattan, my father drove his car in, and we went to Christopher Street to the Oscar Wilde bookstore, where I met Craig Rodwell. And I said, I got $400 here. Fill up this box. I need gay literature, because everyone's afraid to go to a store and buy it themselves. So we didn't have really heavy porn, but they had like these little soft paperback novels and a few magazines, The Joy of Gay Sex or type of stuff. And we filled up this box, and my father drove it back to Queens, and then he would drive me to the airport, and we schlepped it and it went back. So that was, I had a gay library, but it was from speaking with Craig Rodwell, who said, hey, you know, in June, we're going to have a 1-year anniversary demonstration for the Stonewall. So that's how I found out about it. So when the first year of school was over in May or whatever, and I came back home to my parents' house for the summertime, when you're set, I turned 18 that in 70. So, you know, you don't think about that this is going to be it. You're not going to be living with your parents forever. You're going to grow up and be on your own. So I was still living with my mommy and daddy. And I said to mommy and daddy, you know, can I go tomorrow? There's a demonstration I want to go to. It's dealing with gay stuff. And they said yes. So I ended up taking the bus to Queens Boulevard, the E-train to the Village. I walked to Stonewall, and then I saw this big red, white, and black Gay Liberation Front flag. So I didn't know these people. They were old. They were in their 20s and 30s. I walked up to them and I said, excuse me, I'm like your cousin. I started my own Gay Liberation Front. But in retrospect, this is how the movement spread. Because over the next year, when we had the March on Albany, there were like 8 different colleges and different groups that had gay and lesbian groups that we went to Albany. So they included me. They thought I was like a cute little mascot. I was like this tiny little twink. And I did march with them for a while, but I didn't think we had a permit. And the policeman said to me, you're going to get arrested if you stand in the street. So like a good boy at first, I walked on the sidewalk until we went down Christopher Street, and then we went up 6th Avenue. When we hit 14th Street, they all started screaming, off of the sidewalk and into the street, off of the... And I'm going, oh God. So I said, you know, what the hell? I didn't want to be arrested in Manhattan because my mommy and daddy would find out. In Buffalo, they wouldn't know. So I stepped on the street, nothing happened. Didn't get arrested. So I marched with them. And again, this was a demonstration. There were no floats, there were no balloons, there was no music. So you could just walk from group to group to group. So, you know, as I said, I don't think the gay teachers were there yet in 70. They think they came in 74. But whatever groups they had, I would just walk, and I was trying to find a boyfriend, to be honest. But as I said, they're all too old. So, and then there was no people on the sidewalks as we were walking by, really. So that reminded me of Reclaim Pride yesterday, because as we were walking up the sidewalks, there was no one there looking at us. And I also was always half anticipating meeting someone on the sidewalks that I know, and he could run up and hug them and say, oh, you're gay too. Didn't happen. But I was also apprehensive. What if some nasty person who knew my parents was just walking on the sidewalk and goes, there's little Ricky. But that didn't happen either. So that was, and then as I said, then as I got up towards 48th Street, I shouldn't have, but I called a police officer a derogatory term, whereupon he started running at me, whereupon I ran all the way onto Central Park. And as soon as I got on the sidewalk, I turned around and said, now you can't do anything, I'm on the sidewalk. So, and I didn't pee. That's the other thing. I'm 71 now, and like 2 hours is about it for me. I went from Queens to Manhattan to the Village to Central Park, never even worried about where was I going to pee. Then 2 years ago, I was asked to be on the float with Gay Liberation Front for the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, and they put a New York Times reporter with us. And the reporter quotes me, if you look it up on Google, says, all they were talking about was like in the 1970s, sex, drugs, and politics. But according to Landman, sex, they're not getting it. Drugs, no, politics is the same conversation. Sex, they're not getting it. And drugs, all they were talking about was Flomax. So that's my claim to fame. So now it's almost 3:00. I had a very good time, and thank you for inviting me
Rick.
here.
Thank you for
And
being
we'll
with us.
see where this spreads, because on June 1st, I was at Google on Pier 57. I was one of their Pride speakers. And I now, yesterday on the Pride Parade, was walking down the street, and people would say, I saw you on the video thing from Google. So I'm hoping that this gets recorded. I will put it on my Facebook, but I'm in jail because they say that I'm a terrorist, and I'll put it on my infotrue.com, but Google says that I am a deceptive site. So I have to learn how to fix all these things. Oh, plus I did write a book, but you have to get it through my website. And right now my website is deceptive. I created that name in 1997, Infotrue, INFOTRUE.com. They're saying I am phishing for InfoWars and Infographic, which started 20 years later. So don't know, maybe someone out there in computer land will help me. So
Thank you so
again.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's been
Kate.
an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we'll see you all around the office.
Thank you so much.